Hello, BookTube, and welcome to Poetry Thursday. I have a wonderful, sing-songy, old-fashioned, intentionally revanchist poem to read to you today on a very, very warm and cloudy, overcast day. A day where you definitely feel like you could open the windows without freezing the place, but that maybe you wouldn't want to because it looked like it could burst into a downpour at any minute. But I've gone once again back to the Quiller Couch edition of the Oxford Book of English Verse, the revised and enlarged edition that he did decades after he did the one that I've been poo-pooing for years on this channel. And it had a boring cover, so I gave it just a country scene that actually works quite well with today's poem. And there's my tasseled bookmark, Be a Reader. I know these are dorky, but I love them. This is by Wilfrid Blunt, a poet named Wilfrid Blunt, who was a raging a-hole. He's another example of what we always say, what all of us are engaged in all the time, the constant struggle for proportion in the strife of separating the artist from the art. We're all in the process of doing that all the time. I would like to think that with a 100-year-old poem in an old anthology, it wouldn't be much of a struggle. You would just be concentrating on the poetry. But it just goes to show you that raging a-holes can write poems. and the world that this poem describes is intentionally anachronistic. It was even when the author wrote the poem. The poem is called The Old Squire. I like the hunting of the hare better than that of the fox. I like the joyous morning air and the crowing of the cocks. I like the calm of the early fields, the ducks asleep by the lake, the quiet hour which nature yields before mankind is awake. I like the pheasants and feeding things of the unsuspicious morn. I like the flap of the wood pigeon's wings as she rises from the corn. I like the blackbird's shriek and his rush from the turnips as I pass by, and the partridge hiding her head in a bush, for her young ones cannot fly. Rush and bush, little dodgy. I like these things, and I like to ride when all the world is in bed, to the top of the hill where the sky grows wide and where the sun grows red. The beagles at my horse's heels trot in silence after me. There's Ruby, Roger, Diamond, Dot, Old Slut, and Marjorie. He's naming his beagles. A score of names well used and dear, the names my children knew. The horn which I rouse with their cheer is the horn my father blew. I like the hunting of the hare better than that of the fox. The new world still is all less fair than the old world it mocks. Notice there's a hint of something coming in here, that bit about his father. He's using the horn that his father used. I covet not a wider range than these dear manors give. I take my pleasures without change, and as I lived, I live. I leave my neighbors to their thought, my choice it is, and pride on my own lands to find my sport, in my own fields to ride. So it's not just the morning that he likes. The hare herself no better loves the field where she was bred than I the habit of these groves, my own inherited. Loves and groves, again, a little dodgy, but I know my quarries, every one. The mews where she sits low, the road she chose today was run 100 years ago. The lags, the gills, the forest ways, the hedgerows, one and all, these are the kingdom of my chase, and bounded by my wall. Nor has the world a better thing, though one should search it round, than thus to live one's own sole king upon one's own sole ground. I like the hunting of the hare. It brings me, day by day, the memory of old days as fair, with dead men passed away. To these, as homeward still I ply, and pass the churchyard gate, where all are laid as I must lie, I stop and raise my hat. Gate and hat. I like the hunting of the hare. New sports I hold in scorn. I like to be as my fathers were in the days ere I was born. That is the Squire. And that is Wilfrid Blunt writing a poem. The old Squire here is reflecting on tried and true conservative values, for want of a better phrase. He is not just saying that he enjoys the morning. Why this has to be phrased in terms of what you like to kill at what time of day, I do not know. I do not know why that has to happen, but it does, and there are still pockets of rural America, and especially rural England, where it still does. But Gradually it becomes clear that he is not just, this is not just a poem in praise of the beauties of the morning, to which I can attest, even right down to the part about beagles. I have in previous periods of my life had large groups of beagles who were perfectly okay with getting up at that beautiful time of morning when the sudden the as an old friend of mine used to say, the pure blackness of the night sky has broken. There is no light yet, but some sense of yours tells you the night is broken and is done. Maybe it's the wheeling, the particular position of the stars or the moon. Maybe it is light, just below the level of where you can really calculate it with your eyes. I have had beagles who love that time as well as I do. There's nothing better. There's no better. Even right here, even in this area, not in this particular house, but even in this area, I know what it feels like to be on the highest point, the bare escarpments at the highest points of the arboretum, as dawn comes up on a cold winter morning with no snow on the ground, but no movement in the thickets either, because you've got hunting dogs with you. I know what it's like to greet that time with my boys, and it is beautiful. Needless to say, my little baby, oh, my baby, oh, hello, baby. I'm talking about you. My little princess is not interested in that hour of morning at all. She's not a morning person at all. This morning she laid in bed, sleeping and waking up and then sleeping again, stretching and repositioning until 10:15. While I'm just sitting there writing and reading, she was laying in bed trying to convince herself to get up until 10:15. So I am never going to experience that with her. But I have experienced it. But the narrator of this poem, the old Squire, is not talking just about that. You have to wonder, you are invited to wonder, I think, whether or not the old Squire would even like that hour of morning that he's singing the praises of here if it weren't on his own lands, bounded by his own wall. So every tree, every brook, every bramble, every animal, it's all his. And he can have you arraigned in court if you poach any of that game. And when you are arraigned in court for poaching his game, the judge who will walk into the courtroom to sentence you is him. He is, in other words, as he puts it, a king. Once upon a time, pre-income tax, but once upon a time, let's say in the years immediately leading up to World War I, the English countryside was dotted with little potentates like this who had their own land, their own wall, their own manors, and their own people that farmed them and ran them, and they might have had a factor or an accountant who worked in the nearest city, or even, God forbid, in London. And once a year they have to go in to town, to the sink bed of sin that they don't like at all, where they are just another person. Once a year or so they have to go in, sign some documents, that sort of thing. I actually wrote a short story based on this poem years and years and years ago when I first fell in love with it. I love the rhythm of it. I think that it, on many levels, it commemorates all sorts of things that are bad, that don't warrant commemoration. But nevertheless, I think it's a lovely thing, and a lovely, although obviously artificial, look at a world that, even in the context of this poem, is already vanishing. The old Squire, the narrator of this poem, knows perfectly well that a new world exists outside his walls, and he's rejecting it, and that doesn't work, right? That doesn't work. Sooner or later, someone's going to build a railroad within sight of your manor, and it's going to be throwing soot up into the air, and there's nothing you can do about that. And that's going to bring commerce and lots of buildings and new roads, and there's nothing you can do about that either. There's nothing you can do about any of it. Sooner or later, if you wait long enough, your kingdom, bounded by your walls, is going to be surrounded by telegraph wires and then phone wires. You can't do it. It's a no-win battle, and it's just on the horizon of this poem. I don't remember the exact year that this poem was written, but it's just on the horizon. It's a thing that I'm sure that Blunt had heard about from a number of his friends in the Horsey set. I'm sure he had heard that world was coming, that it was knocking on every door. And I like that. There's an inherent drama in that I like. I don't think that I would like the old Squire who is narrating this poem. I don't think that I would like him, but I love reading about him. So anyway, that's your poem for the day, The Old Squire. I am notice I am ostentatiously not calling for a big 800-page biography of Wilfrid Blunt because I don't want one. I don't want to read about him. He was a total jerk. But we'll move on from there to someplace else next time. Today's Poetry Thursday, so the rest of you really have no excuse for ignoring poetry. You might not be reading a poem a day like I am, but you could read a poem on Thursday, traditionally the day for reading a poem on BookTube. But anyway, I'm going to wrap this up and console my baby. She's feeling pretty down in the dumps because rain is imminent, and rain is her mortal enemy. She might have a kind of a business-like extermination ethos when it comes to mice, but with rain, it's personal. So I'm going to go console her. But I'll be back. Thank you, BookTube.